welcome to Fight Network Boxing Weekly. Corey Erdman alongside Morgan Campbell. We are set to ring the bell. That's right, and we have some new digs around here.
Yes.
You guys, if you're watching the video version of this, you have now seen the video intro, which is now playing on a loop behind us for the entirety of the episode. This is fantastic, and I think this accurately represents our brand of sort of like 1980s, early 90s cheesiness.
Well, yeah, like if people are watching this thing, man, that looks old school because that's how we keep it old school, like Michael Olajude's Jerry curl.
Right.
Like, this is the era we're coming from. We grew up. You just kind of became this way.
That's right.
You were born in the 80s.
Correct.
And I was born in the 70s. And yeah, like the times boxing would come on TV, I would record it on VHS. And you had fight videotapes.
Yep.
I remember the Tyson Ruddock tapes on a video, on a VHS cassette. I remember this, Whitaker Chavez on
VHS.
On VHS. And the thing is, my sister used to always tape soap operas, and I remember writing.
You better stop right before.
I remember writing on the cassette, Whitaker Chavez. This is a fight tape. This is not a soap opera tape. Do not record over. And I remember coming home to watch. I'm like, finally, I got this fight on VHS. I'm ready to watch it. I pop it in. There's like 5 seconds of Whitaker Chavez. Boom, another world.
Victor Newman.
Yes. No, my sister was into Days of Our Lives and Another World. And I'm like, Courtney, what did you do? Like, I'd said, don't tape over this. She's like, yeah, but soap operas, man.
Listen, we had the same thing. We've had this discussion before because I grew up with both, like two of my uncles.
Yes.
Both had the scrambler boxes.
Ooh,
so
wow.
I had just a constant flow. Not only could I watch every pay-per-view, but I would get a VHS of every pay-per-view.
Okay.
So, starting in the early 90s.
You're living the life.
So Tuesday night fights, and I would always have those taped, and then we'd have the pay-per-views. They would always come in. I haven't missed much.
You were living the life because what I had to do, and I also remember watching Roy Jones and James Toney in negatives on the pay-per-view channel.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it wasn't even scrambled. It was completely crisp, just in negatives, and that was how I watched that fight.
It's like you're watching like our intro here.
Exactly.
Just sort of distorted.
It wasn't distorted at all.
Yeah.
It was completely crisp,
just in negatives.
I was completely fine with it.
Well, it was sort of old school over the weekend because we had a heavyweight title fight,
Well, you notice too, they never mentioned the denomination.
No,
of the
they said a heavyweight title, but they did mention
in the ring.
Yes,
it said the heavyweight, not the WBC heavyweight champion. They said the heavyweight champion.
I know, which is strange because on the broadcast, PBC and anyone who works on PBC broadcast is taught to avoid denomination and to avoid saying the. When it comes to any title, it's always a bantamweight champion, a heavyweight championship. And even on the broadcast, both BJ Flores and Marv Albert pointed out that Vladimir Klitschko is the heavyweight champion.
Yes.
So, what Michael C. Williams and what Ray Flores do, I don't know why there's a disconnect there. But nonetheless, Deontay Wilder defends his piece of the heavyweight title against Johann Duopa. I had to go out and watch this, or I didn't have to, but I went out to watch this in downtown Toronto at a bar called The Contender, which is boxing themed. It's on Dundas. It's on Dundas West in Ossington.
Okay.
For anyone who's not in Toronto, this means nothing. But it's it's a bar named after. It's boxing themed. There's like boxing paintings on the wall. I get there, no boxing on the television. I had to wait.
Boxing is just a theme, Corey.
It's just a theme. Yeah, it's just a thing. So anytime and boxing didn't come on until like the fourth round. They're like, oh, we don't have that. I mean, it's on regular NBC. I had to like beg with people to get boxing on it, and it reminds you that as much as we like to think that there's a boost in popularity all the time, boxing is still what it is.
Well, yeah,
and there are a lot of times people still don't know what's going on.
Well, and the fact that they would have a boxing themed bar with no actual connection to boxing, it reinforces the idea that the mainstream loves the idea of boxing.
Yes.
But the reality of boxing is something different, and getting people to connect with something more concrete than the idea is a different challenge.
Which is strange, because if you have this like romantic idea of what boxing is, enough to make it a theme because you like the values and the mystique of boxing and whatnot, why wouldn't you have any interest in trying to watch what's going on today? It still exists.
Because actual boxing is violent and often ugly, and a lot of times not as clean and clear cut as scripted boxing.
Yes. Well, what we saw was definitely violent and ugly between Deontay Wilder.
Which one are we talking
and
about
Johann
first?
Duopa. Let's start with Wilder-Duhaupas. We'll start with the main event. Wilder for 3 rounds was given a little bit more trouble than we thought.
Right.
Had more difficulty getting rid of Johann Duopa than we thought, which I think says more about how whalebone tough Duopa is than any sort of like lack of power or anything detrimental that you could say about Deontay Wilder. Wilder for the final 4 rounds in particular put a frightful beating on Johann Duopa to the point where it was getting a little bit uncomfortable, and you wondered just why even bother giving this guy the chance to make it 12 rounds.
Yeah, well, speaking of televised heavyweight, network televised heavyweight title fights, it did start to turn into Larry Holmes' Tex
Cobb. Yes,
where the guy is just, one guy is talented, the other guy's main talent is taking punishment. And again, you start to wonder why this thing is still going on and why the referee didn't stop it before he did. Credit to the referee for stopping it. Credit to Johann Duopa for being tough. But, the fight was what we expected it to be. Duopa giving Wilder a little bit of a problem. Like, he did manage to hit him a few times with the right hand, hence the swollen right eye.
Which might be the only reason it wasn't stopped earlier. Right. Honestly, looking back on it, I think that was the reason, because visually, even though Wilder's getting to him, you're like, okay, well, his eye is closing, so maybe there's some small chance that Duopa can do something.
Well, also, and you have this debate in fights all the time, and like MMA people talk about it all the time. Well, should you score damage to the opponent? And the fact that there was damage to Wilder's eye kind of presents the illusion that there's competitiveness, sort of like Ruslan Provodnikov versus Chris Algieri.
Yes.
Afterwards, people said, well, how could you score that fight for Algieri? Look at his eye. Look what Provodnikov did to his eye. But that was the product of 2 punches in the first round.
Sure.
It's not any reflection of the overall tenor of the fight. But to anyone just tuning in, they see Wilder's eye, they see the swelling, and they say, whoa, this fight must be competitive, even though it isn't.
Well, and damage... which, and this will kind of tie into the opener on that broadcast, too, with Dominic Brazil and Fred Cassie. If you're judging on, whose punches are more impactful or whose you deem to be more powerful, that is so subjective. I mean, we're not feeling what Fred Cassie's feeling. No. We're not feeling what Dominic Brazil's feeling. We don't really know. I mean, and also boxing, we say this all the time, this isn't one of those machines at Coyote Ugly where you stand and measure your punching power with your friends. That's not how rounds are scored. And you can't really, what if Cassie just happens to take punches really well?
Yes. And again, just damage can occur at any point during the fight, and it doesn't indicate what's happening from round to round or even from moment to moment within the round.
Because, if we did view fights this way, whoever is deemed, and people do score fights this way, especially online, whoever coming into the fight is deemed to be the bigger puncher just gets the benefit of the doubt in every single round.
Right, and then you don't need to have the fight.
Yes.
Because as we said, then you could just set up the Ivan Drago pounds per square inch meter.
Yeah.
See who hits it harder. Duopa gives us 1,000 pounds per square inch of pressure. Wilder gives us 1,400 pounds per square inch of pressure. Wilder wins.
Thanks for coming out. Yeah,
right.
You retain your title.
But that's not how This is why we have the fight.
I do think that it was a valuable experience for Wilder to go this deep into a fight, encounter some kind of turbulence, dealing with the swelling in the eye and whatnot. These are things he's never experienced before. And we talked about this last week.
Well, you also... for a guy in Wilder's position, he has to experience what it's like to hit a guy who won't crumble.
Yeah.
Right? And do you stick with your game plan? Do you make adjustments? Or do you yourself crumble? Because, again, while we're referencing Tex Cobb, what was... And this isn't a justification for letting this fight continue on after the point where we figure out that it's not competitive. But how did Tex Cobb beat Ernie Shavers? Except by just absorbing punishment until Ernie Shavers got tired. It was the Homer Simpson model of heavyweight boxing success.
Push boxcar Iro over, and then you're good.
But at the same time, it is a bit of a puzzle for a and as we discussed last week, Wilder he's that rare fighter who is both a champion and a prospect. And every prospect, as we'll get to when we talk about the next fight, every prospect has to, confront this fighter who won't cower before his punching power. And how do you react after that? Do you get frustrated? Do you get tired like Ernie Shavers? Or do you find ways to bring this fight to a close?
Well, and Wilder did get to experience that a little with Stavern, and I think because he had the hand injury in that fight, maybe there was something in his mind that said, okay, happened this time, but I bet I can spark out anybody else.
Right.
And he is finding that when you do step up to that next level, and Duopa, it really isn't on that next level, but it's an indication of what will happen. He's going to have to box guys for 12 rounds because Deontay isn't going to starch everybody in that top 10. He won't. So he does have to use his other skills. Even
as shallow as the heavyweight talent pool is, right? You're not just going to walk through every single guy when you're fighting for the title. And what it did kind of show us was how far Wilder still has to go before he's ready for a Klitschko or even a Tyson Fury, because I think a Klitschko or a Tyson Fury would have given Wilder the blues.
Well,
and if you put them in the ring together, like Duopa hitting you 1 or 2 times and swelling your eye, multiply that by 10, 20, 30. This is what a Fury or a Klitschko would do to Wilder at this point, unless Wilder has more layers to him. But Duopa's not the fighter to bring the layers out of you.
Well, it seems that they're going to have a conundrum then, because all of the discussions seem to point to Wilder versus Alexander Povetkin next.
Yes.
And I put Alexander Povetkin on that level with Tyson Fury and well, not with Vladimir Klitschko. We saw what happened when Povetkin faces Klitschko.
Yes.
But Povetkin could beat Tyson Fury.
Right.
Povetkin could beat David Haye. Like Povetkin might be the number 2 heavyweight in the world. And again, you hear that sort of groundswell of disappointment about these opponents for Deontay Wilder, founded or not. And I think they, and Al Heyman is starting to hear these complaints, and they might be at that point where they just make that fight happen, and you're going to find out on the fly whether Wilder's ready or not.
And it's it's like when your man Terrell Biggs behind you when you fought Mike Tyson, right? It's you build him up, and then you decide whether or not you keep matching him against substandard opponents to try to protect this investment you've made in him. Or you push your chips to the center of the table, you see what happens, and you bet on your guy. And this is the point we're at with Wilder. Crossroads fight in a different way than the veteran reaches a crossroads fight, but this is where we are with him.
I could see him facing Antonio Tarver next before Povetkin. I could absolutely see, because there's no one else. I mean, they could put him in with Areola. I know those discussions have been floated out there before. I could see Areola or Tarver before he gets to Povetkin. I think what everyone else wants is Povetkin. I'm sort of indifferent. Do I love Tarver versus Wilder? No.
Don't.
I don't want to encourage it, but
don't do this to us. Al Heyman, I don't know if you watch or listen to this. Don't. Nobody needs to see. Well, maybe Antonio Tarver's accountant, Antonio Tarver's bank account, he'd be happy for Tarver versus Wilder, but none of the rest of us need to see 46-year-old Antonio Tarver against Deontay Wilder. We don't need to see it.
What about Chris Areola?
Stop. Why Chris Areola couldn't beat Berman Stavern, who couldn't beat...
Right. He had struggled with Curtis Harper.
Wilder.
He had real trouble with Fred Cassie.
I was going to ask you, did Areola beat Cassie or did he not?
It was one of these. It was a draw. Sorry, it was a draw.
Okay.
Which leads us into
so let Areola fight Dominic Brazil.
Yeah, maybe that's the move. Let's talk about
that's
the
a matchup.
Yeah, and this
let Tarver fight Dominic Brazil.
There we go. Hey,
don't let's
Antonio's not going to go for that.
Let's not make the title fight.
It's not going to go for
that.
Let
us not.
Dominic Brazil gets a debatable decision over Fred Cassie in the opener. I saw scores online as wide as 8-2 for Fred Cassie, and a lot of people thought that anything beyond 5-5 for Brazil was a little bit of a stretch. Now, I thought that getting to 5-5 was okay, but I did think that there were a lot of clear rounds for Fred Cassie.
Yes.
And it made me wonder whether that is the best win that Dominic Breazeale will ever have in his professional career.
Well, when you look at just about any fighter that reaches, 25, 30-0 undefeated, gets the world titles undefeated, there's always that fight that they could have lost but didn't because the judges saw it their way. So with Mayweather, it was the first fight with Castillo. With Tito Trinidad, it was the De La Hoya fight where you're watching and you're like, I don't think you won this fight, but the judges gave it to you anyway.
Well, this is even before.
That is the point. That is the point.
Yeah, exactly.
That is the point.
And now some guys get past it because like Adrien Broner had a dodgy decision too. We'll talk about him later on, but he had a real dodgy decision in an 8-rounder early in his career.
Well, right.
And then another one.
Yes,
and that's the thing. Still was able to do something.
You don't usually see this fight this early. This is a test that Dominic Breazeale, if he's as good as he's supposed to be, is supposed to pass. Now, if you're judging on ring generalship, which is as amorphous a criterion as we can come up with, right? But usually it involves, I don't know, moving forward.
Sure.
Then
That's the simplest form.
Then you can give Dominic Breazeale some rounds. 10 rounds, like some of these judges had it
that's
for him.
Insanity.
8 rounds, absolutely not. 5 rounds I'm okay. I thought Cassie won the fight. I'm okay with you giving 5 rounds or maybe even 6 to Breazeale, but 7, 8, 9, 10 rounds, there is no way.
That's just, saying that's going back to what we were saying before. This guy's bigger.
Yes.
He's moving forward. I think he hits harder. So he must be winning these rounds.
So we will give him the rounds.
And you're not missing. I mean, Cassie was hitting him flush.
Yes.
With a lot of stuff.
With everything.
With everything.
And if you want to, and again, because the other interpretation of ring generalship is the ability to use this space to set traps, to walk the guy into the shots that you want to hit him with.
Yes.
Which is what Cassie did. Cassie had all the old guy tricks because Cassie is 36 years old, except he's not like overly experienced.
Yes.
How many wins did Cassie have going into that fight?
I think like 17. I don't know.
He's had maybe 20 fights.
Yeah.
Right. So he's not like the 50 fight veteran who's seen everything.
Right.
Unless he's just been sparring for all these years. But he, all the veteran moves. He set the traps. He switched southpaw to orthodox back to southpaw. Breazeale didn't know what to do.
He might be this generation's, remember Marion Wilson?
Yes.
Gave the really debatable draw to Ray Mercer.
Yes.
Fred Cassie, I'm going to give him Gatekeeper of the Year.
Yes.
Maybe the best gatekeeper in boxing because in a 4-month span, he has proven, and he's done what a gatekeeper does. He has proven when a guy is past it in Chris Arreola.
Yes.
He's proven when a guy maybe either isn't ready or is never going to get there.
And I don't know that Breazeale will ever get there,
which isn't a problem. As a former football player, as we've talked about before, the fact that he's even got this, the fact that he made the Olympics and has got this far as a professional boxer, just fresh out of college, college football, that's remarkable.
And again, and Dominic Breazeale boosters use his football career as proof that he's a great athlete, but you could maybe read it the other way too. Here is this 6'7" quarterback, with all the physical advantages a quarterback could ever dream of, but only, played at Northern Colorado and never had a sniff of a pro career. When you have all these advantages, when we're in the era of the giant quarterback, when, the Cam Newtons of the world are 6'5",
he didn't get a look.
Right. This is what the NFL wants. If you're a massive quarterback, hey, we love you. If you're athletic, right? And the fact that he's 6'7" and never got a sniff of the NFL tells you how athletic he isn't, as opposed to how athletic he is. Because what he is Seth Mitchell with less speed,
right?
Less power. And again, if he wasn't fighting super heavyweight at the amateur level, at the Olympic level, these deficiencies might have been exposed sooner. But again, there's only so long you can protect him. He's supposed to beat a guy like Fred Cassie. On paper, he beats Fred Cassie, but in the real world, he either has to improve quickly or, again, take a really honest look at what his limitations as a boxer might be.
And unfortunately, when you are an American fighter, there's no kind of regional level where you can stop. If you're a sort of limited European fighter,
yes,
a guy in the UK, you can say, I'm looking to win the Commonwealth title.
Right.
And that's it. Unfortunately, for a guy like Brazil, who has a big contract, who has network cable exposure, there will reach a point where he's going to get demolished on television because there are no tiers.
Yes.
Really. Eventually, he's just going to get farmed out and will get slaughtered.
Yeah, well, and it's not like when I say we're growing up like we're the same age and we're not. It's not like when I was growing up and your uncles were, taping all this stuff for you. Where you had. Are we
past the point where they can get arrested for that?
Right. Where you had, exactly, statute of
hopefully,
limitations. Yeah. Right, but it's not like the top ranked boxing days where you could watch a USBA title fight, an NABF title fight, and that was like a title of some repute.
Yeah.
And he's not like Anthony Joshua who can fight for the Commonwealth title. You're right. It's what he's doing now, and it's the world title.
Exactly.
And that's about it. And he has to make that leap. And
that's what happened to Seth Mitchell.
Right. And I don't like Dominic Brazil's chances against Anthony Joshua. I didn't like them at the 2012 Olympics. I can't remember if they fought, but there's a reason why one guy was the gold medalist and the other guy is Olympian.
Right.
And I don't like his chances now.
All right. Well, on the other side of the break, we're going to talk about another guy with a lot of physical gifts who sometimes puts them together and sometimes does not. His name is Adrien Broner.
Okay.
He fights on Showtime this weekend, and we also have some action on HBO as well. That doesn't happen too often anymore, so we're going to talk about this coming weekend's action when we come back on Fight Network Boxing Weekly. Welcome back to Fight Network Boxing Weekly. Corey Erdman and Morgan Campbell here with you. We have plenty of action coming up this weekend. It's like the good old days. We have fights on Showtime and on HBO. We're so used to now just having boxing on regular TV all the time. We actually have to make use of our subscriptions.
Yes.
And HBO basically never shows boxing anymore. We're pretty unbiased when it comes to coverage and whatnot. But literally, if you're subscribing to HBO right now, what have you had, like 4 fights?
Yeah, I'm at the point where I'm subscribing to HBO for John Oliver.
Right.
And the repeats of the James Brown documentary that I keep recording but never get around to watching.
The ongoing Foo Fighters documentary or whatever. Yeah, Sonic Highways.
Right.
Because, even Canelo Cotto, that's a pay-per-view.
Yes.
Triple G David Lemieux, that's a pay-per-view. So really we have Matthysse-Postol this weekend, and then we have... Terrence Crawford, D'Eri Jean.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is, again...
It's not a lot.
One of these fights that the people who say Al Heyman can do no right, at the same time, if Al Heyman had put together that type of matchup,
yes,
they'd be furious.
Well, I mean, I don't mind Matthysse-Postol. I think that's a good fight.
I don't necessarily mind any of them.
Of course, I don't mind anything.
It's more how they fit into the partisan politics of boxing. Yes.
Matthysse-Postol should be a fairly exciting fight. We have two guys who are fairly limited in their approach, I would say. I think Matthysse with a little more nuance than Postol.
I think Postol's more limited than Matthysse.
Way more limited than
Matthysse. What Postol is...
might have less tread on the tires.
Yes.
Or a little more tread on the tires than Matthysse has left.
That is true.
If he is to have a chance in this fight.
But Postol is not unlike the last guy Matthysse beat, Provodnikov. Just Postol, I feel like, is elite by association. And he's a couple levels of elite by association. One, because he trains with Freddie Roach at Wildcard. Folks who aren't that deep into boxing will look at it and say, well, he trains with Manny Pacquiao's coach. He must be as good as Pacquiao. Elite by association, he's not as good as Pacquiao.
There are a lot of fighters out of the wild card who are not good.
Well, Provodnikov, I'm not saying Provodnikov isn't good, but he just gets labeled as elite and viewed as elite.
Right.
Because he trains with Freddie Roach.
And,
And this is good fighter.
Freddie certainly didn't do anything for Provodnikov at his boxing skill.
Right.
Freddie's use to Provodnikov is sort of like keeping him in line, managing his training camp, all of these sorts of things.
Yes.
It's not like he taught Provodnikov new wrinkles.
Yeah, Provodnikov
new things that he's adding.
When you think about crafty fighters, in the 140 to 47 pound neighborhood, Provodnikov's name does not come up. and Postol is kind of the other end of that spectrum. I could see. I don't have Postol's amateur record in front of me, but I could see how he would have been a really successful amateur because he's long, he has range, keeps at the end of his punches, but he doesn't have a lot of power, and he's not super creative. And I think these are, if he couldn't, as we were discussing offline, if he couldn't keep Selçuk
Aydin,
if he couldn't
which we've decided that's how we pronounce his name.
Selçuk Aydin at bay with his punches, then he's not going to keep...
Until he did, and he starched him. But
yes, but I don't know that he hits hard enough to discourage Matthysse.
However, it is in the StubHub Center, so apparently that has some mystique, and it just creates good fights. I think there's a good fight on the undercard as well with Antonio Orozco and Humberto Soto.
Yes.
After Humberto Soto has had 3 consecutive HBO appearances canceled for a variety of reasons. Frankie Gomez not making weight, Ray Beltran testing positive for steroids, and then Jose Felix Jr. got hurt too, and now he finally gets a fight. We'll see if it actually happens.
Ray Beltran, another elite by association.
Yes.
Because he's Pacquiao's sparring partner, he automatically is as great as Pacquiao. Doesn't quite work that way, but elite by association.
Along those lines, by the way, having a Ukrainian fighter to boxing trainers and boxing promoters right now is basically what having a clothing line was to rappers and hip-hop moguls in the early 2000s. You absolutely have to have one. And it doesn't mean that it's any good at all, or he is any good whatsoever. You just need, and just by having a Ukrainian fighter in the stable, he is automatically a threat to everybody in the weight class.
Well, anyone from any former Soviet republic, whether it's Russia or the Ukraine or Kazakhstan.
Super trendy.
Yes. Could be Georgia. Doesn't matter.
Yep.
Right? This is, I mean, when you look at the cards this weekend, you have, how are we going to pronounce his name?
Allakhverdiev.
Allakhverdiev.
That's how it's said on HBO and Showtime broadcast. So
I could have, and my Russian is not great, but I could have sworn his last name was Allakhverdiev.
Yes, that's how I said it. For years.
You have Allakhverdiev in one main event, Postol in another main event. Allakhverdiev is from Russia. Postol is from...
He is from the Ukraine.
The Ukraine, yeah. Right. But they're hot right now. And these fighters rapidly are going to become... Well, they might already be, one of these boxing archetypes where you can bring them in. It doesn't matter how good or bad the guy is. If your guy beats one of these guys, then you say, yeah, of course his prospect is ready. He just beat a tough Mexican.
That's right.
Right? He just beat a strong African. He just beat a determined Kazakh.
Yep.
So he must be ready to go.
Well, and what happens is we turn all of these guys into Russians.
Yes.
No matter where they are,
yes.
No matter whether they're actually affiliated with Russia or not, if we want to make Gennady Golovkin sound more dangerous, he's the Russian slugger.
Yes.
If we want to make him like ominous and dark and like the villain,
yes.
He's Russian. It's like pro wrestling. It
is not different from pro wrestling at all. And this is also what Provodnikov benefited from, right? Because he's not just Russian, he's Siberian.
That's right.
You send him to the ring in the traditional Siberian clothing, and there you go. He's automatically that much more dangerous.
Speaking of pro wrestling, Adrien Broner is basically the closest thing to pro wrestling that we have in boxing. Him and Tyson Fury. If you don't like Adrien Broner, we probably won't get along hang out, because if you don't like Adrien Broner, you don't like fun. I feel like you take life way too seriously if you dislike Adrien Broner. So I take issue with the fact, and I don't know what he actually did to cause this, but Adrien Broner says that it's Dan Raphael's fault, that he's not giving interviews leading up to the Khabib-Allakhverdiev fight this weekend.
What did Dan Raphael do?
I don't know. I forget what happened, but he asked some sort of question that Broner didn't like, and he went nuts. He went nuts on Twitter. I think Raphael complained about there being a world title on the line for this fight, something to that degree.
Right.
And it set Adrien Broner off, and it's ruined everybody's fun leading up to this fight, because the best thing in boxing, period, is watching About Billions.
Yes.
All of those episodes coming out, is watching Adrien Broner on Vine and Instagram and whatnot, and all these ridiculous interviews that he does leading up to these fights. Nothing is more enjoyable than that, and we haven't had any of that. Well, none of it.
And is it Adrien Broner's fault that there's a title on the line? As we discussed last week, if someone offers you a title, says, hey, here's a fight that you might be taking anyway, let's put a title into it, Are you going to say yes? Or are you going to say no? Of course you're going to say yes.
Of course you're going to say yes.
Because this is what, duh.
I will say this, and I've said this before about Adrien Broner, and you can have issues with what he, the positions that he's been put in and whatnot. Again, I think that it's unfair to blame him for those, as we just went through 1 second ago. What you can't deny is that Adrien Broner is the first boxer to make himself a household name and make himself famous using social media.
Yes.
Adrien Broner is basically a self-created superstar via his own brash personality, by going out and hiring a camera crew, creating his own reality show that they edit and put together and whatnot. Adrien Broner, and Max Kellerman said this on the broadcast when he had Waka Flocka Flame walking him to the ring, but he has a cachet in the hip-hop community. He has some degree of a cachet in pop culture to some degree. When Broner fights, he's a trending topic on Twitter, and that's all his doing.
Yes, and he's been able to do this too. When we talk about
despite the lack of competition.
Yes, when we talk about the idea of boxing, right? And this is Adrien Broner sells this idea that he is, again, beyond a Floyd Mayweather. Like he sells this idea that he's that good. Because he's so active on social media, because he's such a troll, and because he's the fast-handed fighter.
Oh yeah,
right. He sells this idea. Whether or not the reality matches it is something different, but he gets you. And then, like when everyone watched him, even after we saw it, because I'm pulling up his record and I'm remembering these fights. Even little Gavin Reese was touching.
Sure, he was.
Adrien Broner.
He was just 130 pounds.
Adrien Broner knocked him out. We still thought, hey, yeah, all Broner all the time. Broner struggled with Paulie Malignaggi, really struggled with Paulie Malignaggi, right? When you think about the type of mystique Broner has created about himself, like the idea of Adrien Broner steamrolls Paulie Malignaggi. The idea of Adrien Broner doesn't struggle, well, might struggle with Maidana, but beats Maidana, right? But the actual Adrien Broner has trouble with all these guys.
And the actual Adrien Broner, despite those limitations, doesn't really care who he fights.
No.
I mean, you can have an issue with who he's actually been matched with, but he still has been asking for Maidana. He has to be put in there with Sean Porter. He lost to both of those guys. He's asked for all of these things. I genuinely don't think he cares who he's fighting.
Well, no, and
he thinks he can beat everybody.
The thing about actual Adrien Broner, if actual Adrien Broner was as good as the idea of Adrien Broner, he probably wouldn't be as entertaining. But actual Adrien Broner has some real defensive deficiencies that make every single moment of every single fight dramatic. He rallied to score this late knockdown of Sean Porter in a fight that he was losing because he's just not that good.
He just didn't do anything.
Yes, and he's not that good at avoiding punishment, but that's what makes him, part of what makes him entertaining.
And I think this is a good fight and a good test to see where Broner's at. So he has a guy in Allakhverdiev who is a fairly straightforward southpaw. And for a guy in Broner, and we talked about it, how inactive he can be inside the ring. The one thing he loves to do is pot shot right hands.
Yes.
Loves to counter with the right hand, even when you watch the footage, and there's limited footage of his camp, thanks to the fun police out there. But the pad work he's doing with Mike Stafford is just him throwing pullback right hands over and over and over and over. And if you have a guy who's a fairly squared up southpaw like Khabib, you'll probably find him. That's good for Broner. If Broner is useless at this point, he'll lose to Allakhverdiev. If he still has something left, and if maybe we can get a little bit more out of Broner, if they can make him a little bit more active in the ring, I don't know if they can. If he has anything left, he'll win this fight.
Yeah, I don't see him not winning this fight. And again, you have him in with a guy who not only is a southpaw who might walk into some straight right hands, but he's not super powerful. 9 knockouts and 19 wins, but wins over some of our cult favorites.
Yes.
He stopped Joanne Guzman, who wrote the book on missing weight.
Guzman he didn't fake it. He was injured to make that happen, but nonetheless.
Of course. Nate Campbell has a win over the Galaxy Warrior. But Broner, this is one of these, image and career rehab fights. You know, you need to get him a belt. You can't put him in with anyone too dangerous. So you put him in with a guy who sort of tailor-made for you, who's also coming off a loss. And you hope, again, the rest of the record makes him credible enough to the public so that when you beat the guy, it looks like you beat the public. Would value this win the same way they would have valued a win over Maidana, the same way they valued the win over Malignaggi.
Well, and as marketable as Broner has made himself, and as much of a cachet as he might have, after losing on network television to Sean Porter, again, what helps the marketing of the next fight? Having a belt.
Having a belt, exactly.
A belt. Doesn't matter what it is. So Adrien Broner coming off a loss, maybe not the greatest. They're coming off a network television loss. Putting him back on maybe isn't the best, but Adrien Broner with a belt.
A belt.
In a new weight class, back down at 140.
Yes.
Suddenly you have another lane to try him out at. And listen, all of this corrects itself. And we've seen it with Broner. You know, everything you might be upset that he was gifted a title by fighting Paulie Malignaggi. Fought Marcos Maidana and he lost that.
Well, right.
He was gifted a spot on network television. Fought Sean Porter, he lost that too. Now he's back on Showtime. Everything corrects itself.
Yeah, and Broner's not in a position, and I don't think will ever be in a position now, you know, unless he goes on a 10-fight winning streak, to sit back and like dictate who he's going to fight and make sure he only fights opponents that are really tailored to him.
Once again, not that he has ever cared about that.
And that's the thing too. Like he, as we've discussed, he had his share of soft touches coming up. But now, he doesn't care. What he wants is the spotlight, and whatever fight is going to put him in the spotlight, then that's the fight he'll take. And he thinks he's going to win, regardless of his deficiencies. He thinks he's going to win. But again, that's part of what makes Adrien Broner fights compelling.
That and his entrances, which is really what I tune in for. I want to know what dance he does coming out of the curtain. What does he enter to? Who wraps him to the ring? Watching
Adrien Broner is like watching New Zealand play rugby. Like, you watch until the haka's over, but the haka is the most exciting part of the game.
Absolutely.
The haka and the entrance of our man, Sonny Bill Williams.
That's right.
Full-time rugby player, part-time boxer.
Still fielding challenges from boxers in New Zealand, by the way.
And maybe
everyone calling him out.
And maybe he'll get to it after the World Cup. But if you guys have a chance to watch Rugby World Cup, when Sonny Bill Williams gets on the pitch, he's instant offense.
Well, speaking of boxing gimmickry, we're going to hit a break real quick. We're going to have the fun stuff when we come back. Yes. We're going to have Roy Jones Jr., a victim of just a horrible theft over the weekend in London. We're going to get to that. We're going to get to possibly talk about Manny Pacquiao's magic MRI.
Let's talk about the magic MRI.
We also have to get to the perverted Japanese boxing media, which is the best as well. We're going to talk about all that. We got about 10 minutes left, so stick with us.
Let's do it
here on Fight Network Boxing Weekly. Welcome back to Fight Network Boxing Weekly. Corey Erdman alongside Morgan Campbell. And Morgan, as you know, I am an unabashed Roy Jones Jr. fan.
Yes.
And, you know, a lot of people aren't out there looking out for Roy Jones Jr. And I feel that I have to be here to look out for Roy Jones Jr., who was a victim of just a dastardly theft in London over the weekend. I'm sure you saw this as well. I know you did.
I'm pulling up the story again just to remind myself.
But for the people out there who are watching or listening, Roy Jones Jr. was in Fedor Chudinov's corner for the super middleweight title bout over the weekend in London against Frank Buglioni, which Chudinov won by fairly wide decision. Roy was working in his corner, but when he left the locker room, he left his cornerman's jacket in there.
Why would he do that?
And apparently, someone stole Roy's jacket. So now the Russian promoter, Vladimir Hurinov, is offering a $50,000 reward for the return of Roy Jones Jr.'s jacket.
Now, is the jacket worth $50,000, or is this just what the reward is?
The reward is $50,000, and we're trying to figure out why it's $50,000.
The only way that makes...
Listen, I have a Russian jacket right here. Here it is. I have a jacket from Russia. And I paid maybe the equivalent of $60.
What does that say on the front?
That says Russia.
Okay.
Yep. So this is very similar, although his is probably, probably not felt or whatever this is. Very similar to what Roy Jones Jr.'s jacket looks like. You see it right there. That is not a $50,000 coat.
No, the only way that jacket is worth $50,000 is if there were $49,985 in the pocket.
Like whose sex tape is in the pocket?
Probably Roy Jones's.
Probably.
We've seen that on the internet before,
that is true, yeah.
Yes.
So I do not put that past Roy whatsoever. He could absolutely have racy photos in his pocket. That's the only way we're paying $50,000. But listen, if you want a very similar jacket, give me a call. Yes. Tweet at me, at Corey_Erdman, and we can make a deal. I don't even want $50,000.
I was going to say, it won't even cost you $50,000.
It will not cost you $50,000, but I will sell you this jacket. We can get it to Pensacola. We can get it to Roy.
And if not in Pensacola, we can just go to the next Body by Vi convention.
Yes.
And meet Roy
with
there.
What was his rapper's name that he was promoting for so long? Two Piece.
Yes.
Two Piece.
I say Body by, you say Vi. Yes.
Two Piece. Oh, God, he was terrible. Also over the weekend, by the way, we didn't talk about the little guys who were fighting as well. Kazuto Ioka won every second of every minute of every round over Roberto Sosa. But that wasn't really the story of the fight, Morgan.
No.
The story of that fight is the build-up to the fight.
Yes.
Which... I don't even really know what to say, but basically, Roberto Sosa is managed by Natalia Rivero, a manager from Argentina. Some Canadian fans out there, or people, boxing fans in general, the hardcores might know her. She's also the manager of Roberto Belanti, the guy who took a dive against Jean Pascal.
Okay.
So, I've met Natalia and whatnot, and Natalia is she is a beautiful woman. But the mainstream Japanese media just could not handle how beautiful she was.
Which is strange.
Which is very strange. And we are not on SiriusXM anymore, so we can read out basically the translation to some degree of
I thought you could swear more on Sirius than you could here.
Well, I don't know. I don't think in our time slot that we could.
Okay.
I think there was a time slot that we had to be in where we could swear. But so basically all of the stories leading up to Ioka Sosa were about how attractive Natalia Rivera was and how this is distracting to Kazuto Ioka and his team. Basically, like, Miss Elizabeth or Sensational Sherry was like standing up on the apron, and Ioka, while he's training at these open media workouts, just couldn't handle it. And when you run a translation of these articles, you realize that this would never, ever get printed in North America, ever.
The one story, the headline says, in translation, "The sex appeal assassin to Ioka? Dangerous."
That's right. And later on...
In reference to Rivera.
In reference to Rivera. But later on in the article, they just make like these insane, crass statements. Like her breast size, which we estimate at 36F. Like, what are you talking about? What does this have to do with the fight?
Which makes me wonder, and I guess the culture of boxing in Japan is different. Well, like the PBC show here in Toronto, and there are no ring card girls. Mm-hmm. And I feel like if you're around boxing a lot, you should kind of be used to seeing busty women because they come into the ring between every single round.
They tell you what round it is. Yes, that's right.
Yet these guys, here's the other headline: Ioka, the busty beauty to bombshell assassin, Sosa camp.
That's right. But then, like, the tab title is even crazier. It's basically like Ioka and you might have to censor this, Ioka and the big tits assassin.
No, it says Ioka, and big tits bombshell.
Right.
Is what the tab says.
That's right.
And this
could be a problem with translation, but I don't think it is.
And these, again, are not like rags writing this. These are like real newspapers in Japan saying, you know what, to heck with the fight. Let's write about
Sosa's manager.
And not just write about the manager and the job she does. Just write about her body parts.
That's right.
Let's disembody her and just write about her as a collection of body parts.
And then add clearly the photographer from the Daily was also there, and she's in the gym at the open workout, and they're having her sort of lean against benches and pose and do all these things.
See, and I don't think Rivero was in on the storyline.
I don't think so at all.
Not salacious at all. There's her.
Well, one was, but then the other one is sort of like your normal, just shaking hands, hey, we made a deal.
But even the pose photo, she's just wearing jeans and a sweater.
Yeah, she's not scantily clad, and not that it even matters.
So she wasn't in on the joke.
No.
They're just like, hey, can we take a picture of you? She's like, okay, yeah, fine.
Yeah, all right.
And they take her picture, and then the next thing you know, she's in this story talking about her body parts and estimating her breast size.
Should we tweet this at Natalia Rivero, or is that snitching on these guys? I feel like Natalia Rivero should know, like, next time she goes to Japan, like,
yes.
Hey, do you know what they're saying about you?
When she Google translates this Japanese to Spanish, it might say something different again.
That's true, yeah.
So it might not even say what
Well, we could run that too. You speak Spanish. We could run that. We'll do that for next week's
I can tell by the way that it translates to English that if I wouldn't even be able to read this Spanish.
Right.
Because the words are all disjointed.
Man.
Champion Kazuto Ioka, 26 equals Ioka first defense against its assassin of sex appeal, Steamy. Right?
You're right.
So that was in Spanish. I wouldn't know what that means.
We should mention on the undercard as well, Katsunari Takayama retained his piece of the minimum weight title. He defeated Ryuji Hara. Takayama, you'll remember, had that amazing fight against Francisco Rodriguez Jr. in the fight of the year last year. Some people speculated that, hey, maybe Takayama doesn't have the motor that he once did. He definitely did in this fight. And what we saw in this fight is kind of what we saw against Francisco Rodriguez last year. You'll remember, like, the reason that fight was amazing is because Takayama can throw a million punches, never gets tired, but also doesn't hit very hard.
Yes.
And basically, this fight got stopped because there was a point when Hara just couldn't stop any of the punches from hitting him. It wasn't even really that he was getting hurt. There was just such an insane barrage of punches being thrown, and like the computer was just scrambled, and the ref said, okay, that's enough. Like it wasn't like he was wobbled or anything like that.
Well, and it's, you know, people that, I was going to say people that don't watch a lot of boxing, but even people that do. There's always this idea that like smaller guys, because they're smaller, don't hit as hard. Maybe in an absolute sense, but that's
all relative.
That's all scaled to the size of the fighter. Except in this case, where this guy is just all volume all the time and just hopes to wear you down like raindrops.
Which to me makes him arguably the most exciting fighter on the planet to watch, or one of them. Well, he's the reason that Troy Dorsey is my favorite fighter to ever watch.
He's the anti Adrien Broner.
Exactly.
He's not going to sit back and pot shot you. He's going to punch from the beginning of the round to the end, and then that's that.
We have about a minute and a half left, but we have to get to the biggest news of the week, and just a heartwarming story of recovery. Manny Pacquiao, all the way recovered from his shoulder surgery, tweeted photos of him getting an MRI. The results came back negative. And
of course they came back negative because he swam in the ocean.
That's right.
The ocean healed his shoulder.
Yes.
And I don't know if you guys know this, but we're Manny Pacquiao shoulder injury truthers.
Yep.
He's tore his rotator cuff in the fight. But again, if you've seen other fights in which guys tear rotator cuffs, you know the minute they've done it, because everything changes.
Kobe Bryant had the same injury.
Yes.
Kobe Bryant hit the practice floor last week.
Yes.
He missed the whole year and then came back to shoot a basketball. This guy's punching guys, and he's going to hit a bag tomorrow.
When Andre Berto tore his rotator cuff against was it Jesus Soto Crash?
Yes.
There's a moment. There were moments that Andre Berto could use his left arm, or was it the right arm? Moments Andre Berto could use his right arm, and then you see when the muscle tears, and after that So, quick Manny Pacquiao story. He was supposed to come to Toronto for the Gentlemen's Expo, which happened last week.
Yep.
So from the summertime, the organizers of the expo were emailing me. We were going back and forth about a Manny Pacquiao interview, because in my day job, I work at the Toronto Star Touch.
Yep. Download the app.
Download the app to your iPad, exactly. So we had set up this interview, and Manny Pacquiao was going to sit down with us. We were going to talk on camera. About a month ago, start getting these emails from the organizers. This was so in between us making this deal to sit down with Manny Pacquiao and this thing actually happening, that's when Manny Pacquiao does the interview with the guy over in Japan, saying, yeah, you know what, my arm feels fine, I can do whatever I want with it, and I never even saw a doctor, I didn't do any rehab, I just swam in the ocean and the seawater healed me.
Yeah, God healed me.
Right.
Yep.
That's what Manny Pacquiao
Waters
said.
of Lake Minnetonka.
So now, as this event approaches, I start getting these emails from the organizers of the expo saying, hey, we need you to sign an embargo if you're going to interview Manny Pacquiao. And I said to myself, well, I don't usually do these things. We'll sign embargoes in terms of dates.
Or like disclosure of names or...
No. Just in terms of, okay, hey, here's this contract we've signed.
Right.
But we can't release it until next week.
Fair, yeah.
So sign this embargo saying that we'll tell you all these details, but don't publish anything till next week. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
But this embargo was just a long list of conditions about things we couldn't ask Manny Pacquiao. It said not to ask about his shoulder injury or the shoulder rehab, not to ask about all these lawsuits that fans had filed after Pacquiao said, hey, my shoulder was torn, and all the fans said, well, why did I buy the fight? Why did I bet on you? That's fraud.
Not to ask about any contractual dealings between him and Bob Arum and HBO. I didn't know what that meant.
And then also not to ask any questions that would make Manny Pacquiao's or Bob or HBO or Top Rank look bad.
Right.
And I thought to myself, well, how do I know what question that is? It's not my question.
You'll make yourself look bad. Right. It's not me.
It's not my question that makes you look bad. It's the answer.
But all those three things combined, what the hell do you ask him about?
Well, right. And the only way I thought, well, maybe I'll sign it and then just ask him, well, do you want a rematch of Floyd Mayweather? And why do you think you could beat him next time around? And see if he could answer the question without mentioning his shoulder.
Right.
That way if he brings it up, then it's fair game.
Yeah.
But the other condition in this long list was that Pacquiao's team and Top Rank reserve the right to change the conditions at any time between now and the interview.
Right.
So if I sign this one list of conditions, I'm also signing on to another set of conditions that I might not even know exists, because at any point between now and the interview, they could say, oh, all that stuff we agreed to, we're not, you can't ask us questions about it. And you've already agreed to it because you've signed this document. Long story short, I didn't sign the document because I wasn't, as much as we wanted to get a one-on-one interview with Manny Pacquiao, if I can't ask any questions, well, then what's the use of having the interview? And then Pacquiao wound up canceling on the
expo in general.
On the expo anyway.
Went swimming.
Went swimming. But again, it appears that Pacquiao is again comfortable giving us some information about the state of his right shoulder.
Well, and clearly he's comfortable with incriminating himself, and we have to wrap up here. But either the waters did actually heal him.
Yes.
Or if an MRI 4 months removed from when the torn rotator cuff apparently occurred comes up negative, then you never had a torn rotator cuff. I think that's how we can wrap this up. That does it for this episode of Fight Network Boxing Weekly.
Now, right now, I do have a little bit of impingement in my right shoulder, but
can you handle this? You're so courageous, Morgan Campbell.
Yes.
That does it for this episode of Fight Network Boxing Weekly. We'll see you guys next week.